across one more, and then 450 y. So that's my ending point, and it draws that rectangle for me there. Top left hand, and then bottom right. Now, if I could, as like the minimum amount of parameters, I could just put those 2 points there. But I want to make it a blue rectangle, so I'm going to put in another parameter, fill equals blue. That's just fill equals blue. It tells you what the color of the shape will be. I think by default it's white, because there's no fill. All right. Now the next thing, I'm going to go to create oval instead of create polygon. Create oval is basically how you create any kind of circular shape. And as you can see, there are four integers to start with. Now, you might think, how do I create a circle how do I create a circle? I'll probably maybe pick a center point and then get a radius. Well, but then what if it's going to be like an oval? Well, what we do here to create circles is basically the first two guys are pretty much like the rectangle, right? It's your x and y value of some point, right? And then the second two guys are also an x and y value, but they're of your ending point. And what this will do, right, is it will create some sort of rectangle, right? Like invisible rectangle. And within the rectangle, that's where your circle will be. Like going all the way around, filling up the space as much as possible. It's kind of like a bounding box there. And so that's how you would use create oval. Top left-hand corner of your point, and then bottom right-hand corner of your point of your bounding box for your oval, and the oval will fill it. And that's how you do it. So we look at there, it says 150, 150, right here, 150x and 150y, and then 200, 200 for the second point, which is down here. That's this rectangle, as you can see. That's not there, but like that's what rectangle will come up. And then the circle fills it inside. And again, I can put in some other parameters. Fill equals blue, make it a blue circle. Outline equals black. I want to make sure that the outline is there. And I want to make sure that the outline is not just 1 pixel thick, so I'm going to go width equals 3. And that's what I've got there. Create polygon. Now, other than rectangles and ovals, every other shape is a polygon. So, how we had 4 sets of integers, or 2 pairs of integers, now we have multiple pairs of integers, right? We have, in this one, 3 pairs of integers because we want to create a triangle. And a triangle needs 3 points. So that's your x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3. It'll create your, it'll set those as your points, and then it'll connect the dots for you. And that's exactly what happens here. You can see that there. 175, 200, that's around here. And it goes to this point and then that point, and it makes a triangle for you. Now, something to note is that, let's say I created some points, right? Let's say x like that, some point here, which is the next one, and then some point here, which is the third one, and then some point here, which is the fourth one. What it's going to do is it's going to connect them in the order that we wrote them in. So that way, that way, that way, and then that way. So just remember that. They always go in the order that you have written them down in. Same thing with polygons. You can put in other parameters as well, like fill or outline or whatnot, but in this case we just want to have it to be filled. Create line. It's pretty much the same. If you want to make a line, you need 2 points, and then it'll connect the points for you. So that's what we have there: x1, x2, x1, y1, x2, y2, and 100, 125. So that's here, and then it goes. Then the next point is over here, and it draws the line for you. If I want to make my line have a different color, I need to set the fill to be a different color. So I set fill equals blue, not outline or like line color. Fill equals blue, and that will get the color to be what you want it. And I want that to be maybe 2 pixels thick, so width equals 2 pixels. All right. Let's see, what else can I do? Yep. Okay. Last thing is you want to create some text. Now, as you can see, there's this line of code here that says my font is some tuple. And the reason why we have that is basically we use it to make our code look cleaner and prettier. Now, create text. All you need for create text is really just the these kinds of things, right? The point, some text, and some font. Now, by default, this point here, this XY value, it is the center of your text. So if I were to think of some text like this, right? Imagine that again there is some bounding box around it. Now, by default, your point, where you create your text, is the very center of that text. So that makes it kind of easy to like put stuff around. You can just find where you want it to center on, and you place that point there. If you wanted to set it to maybe this corner here, you can by putting in a parameter called anchor, and then setting it to northwest. That's northwest up there. Yep. You could set it to this one if you really wanted, and that's northeast, and so on and so forth. And that's how you would set your anchor. Let's call your anchor for your text. But by default, it is in the center. So unless you see that anchor setting, just assume it is the center. So here I want to center my text on 175, 75. So that's 175 and then 75. So that's where my text is. I need to obviously give it the text. So text equals shapes, some string. And then this last bit, font equals my font. And that basically means the font is going to be past this tuple here. The font, font name, font size, and font style. Now, if I wanted to, I don't have to do that. I don't have to write my font equals some tuple. I can do it explicitly in the code. So let's say I wrote the same thing up until here. I go font, and then I can go equals. I want to make sure I have a bracket because I'm going to be using commas. That's going to freak out my code if I don't. I'm going to put in, yep, Monaco, let's see, 24 for the font, and I want the style to be bold, so I'm going to put in that there. And then I will close that bracket, and then close the bracket of my whole method. And that works exactly the same as doing it with a variable. In fact, if you wanted to give these guys as points, you can totally set some. You can totally set something like first vertex is some tuple which is like say 150 and 300, and you could totally put that there as in place of your first two parameters saying first vertex. That's totally fine. But otherwise, that's pretty much how you will create shapes, and that's pretty much how you create text on the canvas. One thing to note though, the order in which you write your code matters, because let's say I create some triangle, right? And I want it to be like a black triangle, but then I also want to have a blue circle inside of it, right? Da 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 da. If I write my code for my triangle after the code for my circle, what's going to happen is the triangle is going to paint on top of the circle, and you won't see the circle. So remember, the order in which you write your code matters. And so if I wanted to get the shape, I'll need to code the triangle first, and then code the circle, and then it'll go on the right way. That'll be helpful for you later. Okay, but that's pretty much it for how to draw shapes. Any questions? Okay, good. Now, this is the part which is more important, because this is the part where you'll probably be tested on in your assignment, and you'll probably be tested on in your exam in some shape or form. What we'll do is usually we'll have a code, and then it'll say draw the pattern from the code. Great. So let's see how this works. I'm passing this function a canvas because I need to do canvas functions, canvas methods, and I'm going to make some sort of pattern that goes in a grid-like fashion. So for that, I need to have some sort of size for my grid, the squares in which the grid is. So grid size is 50 pixels, so 50 pixels across, 50 pixels down. Cool. I want to make a pattern that looks like this grid here. So the systematic way to do this is to go, I'm going to go each row, and then I'm going to go in each row, I'm going to do something for each column. And then as I go row 0, column 1, column 2. iterate across, row 1 and then iterate across, and then row 2 then iterate across. In order to do that, we need to have a loop inside of a loop. So that's why we have 2 for loops here. And the first loop is going through each row, and the second loop is going through each column. But I need to make sure that whenever I go to a new column or a new row, I need to go to the correct spot. So that's why I have these 2 values here. Y is initialized to 0. That means I want to start here on this y, on the y value. And when I go into my second loop, I want to initialize, when I go into my first loop, before I go into, before I go to the next row, I want to make sure that my x value is initialized back to 0 so that I'm brought back to the most left. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to go here and I'm going to iterate across in x values of grid size. But then when I go to the next row, I want to make sure that I'm bringing my x value back to the start. So that's what this x equals 0 is for. And then I have some for loop. As you can see, the pattern kind of alternates between 2 different things. So if I want that to happen, I need to have 2 different conditions, but I want to alternate them in a systematic way. And that is basically what this Boolean value here is saying. Circle is row modulus 2 equals 0. And what that is saying is, if the row is an even row, so if this row is an even row, we're going to set this circle Boolean to true. And as you read the code further on, it basically says, if it's an even row, I'm going to start with a circle. And as you can see, rows and columns start with 0. So 0 is an even number, so that's why we start the circles on 0 and 2. Cool, let's go into our column loop. So this is going through each row, and then now I'm going through each column. If it's a circle, cool, let's do this thing, create an oval. I want to give it some values, but I want to give them in variables that are relative to what my x and y and my grid size are. So, create oval xy. As you can imagine, in the first row and the first column, xy is 0 and 0. So that's top left point here. I want to make my circle as big as the grid, so plus grid size and plus grid size here. So x plus grid size and y plus grid size, that's my bottom right corner. And there we go, I create my circle with all these parameters. And then as I go down, I want to increment my grid size for x. I want to increment my x value with grid size. And then I want to flip over my Boolean to not circle. So if it was true, I want to make it false. If it was false, I want to make it true. And that's what this line here does. Circle equals not circle. Not just negates the value and it changes it to the other Boolean value. So after the first iteration, I go to the next column. So x is now x plus grid size. So y is still 0, but x is now over here. I'm going to go if circle. Well, I knotted my circle before, so it's going to be else. And that's where I'm going to create my line. So x and y, x is here now, y is still there. X plus grid size and y plus grid size. There we go, that's my 2 points, my line goes across. Now, again, I want to keep on moving forward, so x plus grid size. So now my x is here. And I'm going to knot my circle again, so it's going to go back to true. So as I go in here, if circle, yes, that's correct. So x and y is now here, and that's the next point, and it creates a circle, and so on and so forth. And then once I exit this loop, I'm going to increment my y, so that when I go to the next row, x will be brought back to 0, but y was already incremented by grid size, so now I'm starting here. And then I go into my loop. If circle, well, is it a odd even row? No, it's not. So it's not circle. So else x and y, that's here now, and then x plus grid size, y plus grid size is now here, and it does that, and it just keeps on incrementing and going through that. This example on the board will be given to you in your lab sheet, so you don't have to look up and look down, but it's right there in front of you. But you will have to do something very similar to this. Yep. Any questions on how that works? How the 2 loops work? All right, that's great. Okay, so we're gonna pass out your